Okay, share screen.
Mhm. Mhm.
Are you able to see the share screen button, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. If we run into difficulties, remember I've got it too, so.
See
There
it?
you go, yep.
Okay, great. I'm gonna move a couple things around here.
And everybody, just so you know, if you are not muted by yourself, I am going to be scrolling through and muting you. We will unmute at the end for Q&A. But if you end up unmuting yourself accidentally, please just try to mute yourself so we can all hear Amy.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming. I'm excited to talk about Burnt Mill Creek. It's my neighborhood creek. I only live about 3 blocks away on Princess Place Drive, and it's really added immensely to our enjoyment of our neighborhood and Wilmington. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the creek, show you some pictures so you get a feel for it if you haven't been there before, a brief history, talk a bit about the wildlife that use the creek, and talk quite a bit about some of the water quality issues that really are common to most every urban stream. And I'm not just going to talk about the things that aren't going right. I'm going to tell you all things that we can all do to improve the water quality. There are a number of projects underway or already completed along the creek that are fairly recent. I'll give you an overview of those, talk about some future projects, and have some time for questions. You're going to see a lot of photographs like this one of the barred owl family, and these are pretty much every photograph you'll see today is an actual photograph of the creek and wildlife that has been seen along the creek. Okay, starting here, this is a picture of the confluence of Burnt Mill Creek and Macomber's Ditch near Shirley Road. This is just upstream of Archie Blue Park where the event's going to be today. To get you oriented, here's a map showing where the creek is located in case you aren't familiar with it. Here's Cape Fear River on the left of the screen. Here's downtown Wilmington. The creek runs, really the headwaters of it are up near Carr Avenue and Randall Parkway. There's Ann McCrary Park where there's a big retention pond, and the creek flows west and then north into Smith Creek, which then ultimately goes out into the Cape Fear River. Lots of neighborhoods located along the creek, Brookwood, Carolina Place, Carolina Heights, Princess Place, and Love Grove. And there's a lot of parks along there as well as the National Cemetery, the historic Bellevue and Oakdale cemeteries. I'm going to focus today primarily on the 1.3 mile section of the creek that runs from Metz Avenue down to Love Grove. That's where the city greenway is, and it's pretty easily accessible to the public. And while you have to cross over some streets to walk along it, like Market and Princess Place and Chestnut, it's still, you can walk that whole section fairly easily. So here's some photos of various sections of the creek that I just talked about. Here's what the creek looks like near Forest Hills Elementary, which is right to the left of the page here. Here's the section from Metz Avenue to Market. So over on the right side, you would have the Brookwood neighborhood, and on the left side, the Carolina Place neighborhood. You can see in the background here, that's Market Street, and that's the Port City Java little shopping center on Market Street. And you continue on to the north and you will cross over Chestnut. You see Mary Bridgers Park here on the left. You can see the creek starts to get a little bit more, look a little bit less like a ditch and more like a stream. And once you cross over Princess Place Drive, it starts to be much more naturalized. And there's actually a really nice marsh that's contiguous with the creek north of Princess Place Drive. Continuing on along the creek where Shirley Road is, ends west end of Shirley Road, ends at where this CSX Railroad crossing is. And then continuing north, you get to Archie Blue Park. I took this photograph from Archie Blue Park looking north. If you were to turn around from that vantage point and look back south, you would see this tide gate that's at Archie Blue Park, which is operated by the city. And then there's the final picture in this series is taken from the very, very nice new One Tree Hill Bridge that connects 23rd Street to the Love Grove neighborhood. And you can see by the time you get to this section of the creek, it's much more naturalized, much broader. And maybe another quarter mile or less from this point is where the creek enters into Smith Creek. So the big picture, I'm going to be talking a lot today about watersheds. A watershed, for those of you who are familiar with that term, is basically the area of land that every bit of precipitation that falls in that area, if it doesn't percolate into the ground, if it doesn't seep into the ground, it's going to run off and it's going to run down into the receiving stream, which in this case is Burnt Mill Creek. I've shown you where Burnt Mill Creek is in this blue line on here. So you can see it's got a pretty big watershed. Rain that falls near College Avenue, the south side of Market Street, the north side of Oleander, and in a good chunk of downtown Wilmington, probably all the way about 5th or 6th Avenue, rainfall that again doesn't percolate into the ground will flow ultimately into this creek. And on the left side, the city of Wilmington's made this really nice map of all the watersheds in Wilmington. And of course, we all live in a watershed, so everything I'm talking about today applies to almost all urban watersheds. They often have the same types of issues with pollution. So we're talking about a 4,200 acre watershed. A little bit about the history of the creek. I don't know a lot about it. It's hard to find information, but I was able to find these really terrific 1920s and 40s photographs in the New Hanover County Public Library collection. And so this is what the creek looked like at, I think pretty sure this is Chestnut, where Chestnut Street is today. And you can see the National Cemetery in the background. And the creek back then looked a lot more naturalized than it does now. Of course, much less development along the creek. Here's another picture of some kids playing in the creek, again, near the National Cemetery between Chestnut and Market Street, and a really pretty snow scene. You can see very, very little development. But even back then, even back during the Depression, there was an issue with trash in the creek. From what I've been able to tell, it seems that in those early days, raw sewage was put directly into the creek, flowed downstream, and that's what the predecessor to the current tide gate accomplished, was it kept sewage from flowing back up the creek into these neighborhoods when there were high tides downstream. So you see the Carolina Place neighborhood, a very early streetcar neighborhood in the city off to the left of this photograph. Moving later pictures, these are some from the Star News that were also in that New Hanover County Public Library collection. This 1964 picture is taken from the bridge at Princess Place Drive looking north. You can see the creek has got a lot of trash in it and vegetation, and at that intersection there were two gas stations. Both of them are inactive now. Carter's Pharmacy, and another one on the right. There's some kids on a little dredging platform. Here at photos from the 90s, you have some city crews in the creek. This was after they had applied some pesticides to the creek to kill a lot of this invasive vegetation. And then you've got a family fishing on the right here in the creek. The picture on the left here is kind of interesting. This is right at Metz Avenue. And this is, we typically wouldn't do this today. This is these big concrete mats along the bank of the creek. So there's this short little section there that's this sort of engineered bank, which is not really desirable if you're trying to be able to support habitat and wildlife. And there have obviously been issues with fish kills in the creek over the years, and those seem to be less frequent, fortunately. So that's gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what the creek has looked like over the last roughly century or so. And I want to spend some time talking about my favorite part of the creek, which is all the wildlife it supports. This is a yellow-crowned night heron, which is a bird that actually breeds along the creek, particularly the section north of Princess Place Drive. Beautiful large bird that eats fish. We've got a couple main kinds of habitat along the creek, terrestrial habitat and aquatic habitat. And one of the things that's particularly nice are all the mature trees, a lot of beautiful mature cypresses, maple trees, gums, some nice native trees. One of the habitat that's particularly important is there's still a lot of brushy, wild, messy areas, and those provide cover for a lot of animals. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is making sure we don't get the creek too maintained. There's some benefits to allowing snags to remain, to keeping dead trees up where they aren't going to be a danger to people. This on the upper right here, you see a dead cypress that is just full of pileated woodpecker cavities. And on the left here, bottom left, you can see together a great blue heron and a little blue heron right behind it. This is all section of north of Princess Place Drive, these marshy areas. But the creek also has some important aquatic habitats. We think it's a mix of brackish and freshwater. Of course, the closer you are to Smith Creek, the more brackish the water is. And the further south you go, it's probably less brackish. There are quite a few wetlands that still are adjacent to the creek, particularly again north of Princess Place Drive, as well as connected marsh. You see some fiddler crabs here. You see the tidal influence on the trunk of this cypress tree, and obviously this fiddler crab habitat's getting exposed during more low tide conditions. I want to talk a bit about birds. I'm a birder, and this is really one of the best places to bird in Wilmington. It's a hot spot. There are people come from all over the state and even from other states who are visiting, who are interested in looking at birds, and they bird along the creek. And there's been 175 species of birds just along that 1.3 mile section of creek I mentioned that have been documented in eBird, which is Cornell's citizen science project to document birds. And we have both migrant and resident birds. There are birds that come here to breed in the summer and then go south in the winter. And there are birds that winter here and go further north to breed when it's summertime. And I wanted to start with a truly special bird, the golden-winged warbler, which my friend and birder Jamie Adams saw at the creek a couple of years ago. I think this is the only documented occurrence of this bird in the southeastern North Carolina in our area. And they're nearly endangered. They're a very small bird that really likes insects. So they're dependent on insects like a lot of the warblers. So this bird lives in, the upper US, or breeds in the upper US and in the Appalachian Mountains. And every spring and fall it migrates, or in the fall rather, it migrates all the way down to Central America. So our little humble, scruffy Burnt Mill Creek provided some temporary refuge and food for that bird, that rare bird, while it was on its annual migratory trip back to Central America. Couple of slides with just mosaics of photographs of birds that people have taken across along the creek. We have birds that feed on fish, birds that feed on insects, and was lovely barred owl here with a crayfish it has caught in the creek. We have raptors, a number of different kinds of hawks, Mississippi kites, bald eagles. Again, a few more warbler pictures. Belted kingfishers, who of course depend on fish. With ducks, we get a fair number of ducks overwintering in the creek, which is always a pleasure to see. And wood ducks are here in the summertime as well. So that gives you an idea of some of the 175 species of birds that have been seen along the creek. Other critters that depend on the creek. I'm not a fish person, but from what I understand, the creek supports carp, bowfin, bluegill, largemouth bass, mullet. People have seen some juvenile blue crabs in the creek, as well as a wide range of insects, frogs and toads, amphibians. I've seen red-shouldered hawks catch anole lizards along the creek and eat them. And there are alligators. We don't see them very frequently, but they certainly are in the creek. There was a really big one up near Wallace Park last year that a bunch of people got to see. And of course, we think there's some beaver, muskrat, coyotes, foxes that use the corridor. So those are some of that habitat, the support of wildlife in such an urban setting like Wilmington, the city of Wilmington, right in the heart of the city is really, really special. And so we want to make sure that the creek stays as healthy as it can to support that habitat, and also for the enjoyment of people. But the creek has a lot of threats, a lot of issues, and I want to talk about those and what we can all do about it. I'm going to talk about pollution, invasive species, and over maintenance of the creek, particularly of the buffer. Human beings have a long history of using waterways as a place to put our waste. The old saying, dilution is the solution to pollution. Well, we've gone a little bit too far with that, and especially these days when a lot of the things we put in the water or end up in the water have extremely long lives. They don't degrade quickly. Things like plastics last for thousands and thousands of years in the water before they degrade. One of the things that I think a lot of people think when they think of water pollution is things like what we show on this slide, which is an industry that has waste coming out of a pipe into a river or a stream. And that's not the issue in most urban environments. In urban environments, we usually have different pollution threats. Those are multiple, diffuse, man-made sources, and there's typically little or no regulation of those diffuse sources. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, is the diffuse sources of pollution in the creek. So here we get back to watersheds. There's a lot of pollution that occurs directly adjacent to the creek, illegal dumping, people who don't pick up their pet waste, things like that. But probably the vast majority of the pollution in Burnt Mill Creek is coming from elsewhere in the watershed. And it's getting to the creek primarily via stormwater runoff. So a quick stormwater 101. If it rains up near College and Randall Parkway, where does that water go? If the rain hits a pervious or a permeable surface, most of it's going to infiltrate unless it's a really flashy, intense storm. It's going to infiltrate into the ground. But if that rain hits impervious surfaces like streets, sidewalks, rooftops, driveways, the rain is going to run off, and it's going to run off into a series of, it's going to go into an inlet like one of these, might be a curb inlet, might be a graded inlet like this one in my alley. And that water is, as it runs down streets and sidewalks and over rooftops, it's going to pick up trash and pollution and road dust and any soil. And it's going to go into a system of pipes, and those pipes or ditches or both end up outfalling directly into the creek. I think there's a big misconception that stormwater is treated, that it goes to a treatment plant, the sewage treatment plant. It does not. It does not get any treatment at all. And the purpose of these systems is to prevent flooding. People don't want flooded roadways. They're dangerous to drive on, and people don't want their homes flooded. But it's primarily to keep water off the roadways. So every time it rains, stormwater throughout the watershed flows to Burnt Mill Creek. And again, as a reminder, here's that 4,300 acre watershed. And if it doesn't stay in the creek for some period of time, it'll get moved on out to Smith Creek, to the Cape Fear River, and ultimately the ocean. Burnt Mill Creek is in a floodplain. It is also a floodway. A floodway is when you have actual moving water that is outside the banks of the creek. And so when that happens during flood events, which are fairly frequent, even more pollution and trash can get picked up and put into the creek. And another issue with floods along the creek is they have resulted in sanitary sewer overflows, and I'll talk about those a bit later. But let me go back here. Before I mention this, back to impervious surface. The city's comprehensive plan says water quality is impacted when 10% of the surface impervious, 10% of a watershed is impervious. In 2016, Wilmington as a whole was estimated to have 28% impervious surface. 25% is considered the maximum for healthy aquatic ecosystems. So we're already above that in the city as a whole. And Burnt Mill Creek back in 2009, our watershed was estimated to have 36% impervious surface. And that's gotten worse since 2009. There's been a lot of apartment development along Carr Avenue, Randall Parkway. So all the woods that become converted to paved surfaces increases the amount of pollution that ultimately runs into the creek. So the typical urban watershed pollution sources are going to be human sewage overflows, pet waste, trash, whether it's dumped directly into the creek or comes into the creek through stormwater runoff, PAHs, which is a series of chemical compounds I'll talk about, leaking underground fuel storage tanks, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, grease and detergents, sediment, and in some cases, some old pre-regulatory landfills. All of these apply to Burnt Mill Creek. So let's talk about sewage first. The Creek Greenway is a corridor for the major sanitary sewer force main and some gravity mains that basically take the majority of the downtown sewage to the CFPUA Sweeney treatment plant, which is on North 23rd Street. Our bills that we pay every month have to include enough money to help CFPUA maintain these systems, many of which were very old when CFPUA was formed. This sewer main is more than 40 years old. And older infrastructure gets, the more it tends to fail, particularly if it's not maintained. And there have been a number of untreated sewage overflows into the creek and the greenway itself. In July of 2018, these just a couple recent ones, a 72,000 gallon untreated sewage release at the Shirley Road area. And a really big one last year in December, 2.4 million gallons of sewage was released because the force main failed at pump station 10, which is located off of One Tree Hill Road near 23rd Street. But the CFPUA is investing a lot of improvements, and I'll share those with you towards the latter part of the presentation. Pet waste is always also an issue, and we don't really think about the combined impact of the 38,000 registered dogs in New Hanover County. The City of Wilmington estimates that over 14 tons of dog waste is generated every day in the county. And we see that in some of the testing that Cape Fear River Watch has done as part of their Creek Watcher effort, doing tests of fecal coliform along the creek. Here's a summary of, I think this was 16 fecal coliform tests over the last roughly year, and half of them exceeded EPA standards. So one of the biggest things people can do, of course, is real simple. Just pick up dog and cat poop and discard it in a trash can. Pollution. We have really just a terrible ongoing problem with plastic pollution, particularly trash, ending up in the creek. These are a couple photographs of trash in the creek, and this, just heartbreaking picture of this barred owl, young barred owl, perched on a plastic soda bottle. All those soda bottles and cups and fast food trash that people throw out of their windows of their cars, or that blow off the back of pickup trucks, unless somebody comes and picks it up, it ends up in the creek. That's where it goes. What you can do about this is, we can all do this. You can adopt your block. My husband once a week goes out and picks up all the trash off our block. And this is typically what he gets every week. It's just, a soda bottle here and a cup lid there. And over the course of a week, in just a block, it adds up to quite a bit of trash. We also go down to the creek and participate in the Cape Fear River Watch and Keep America Beautiful cleanups. Those are terrific community activity. Here's one of those big sewer pipes that runs across the creek right near the railroad tracks. And we walk down there and bring our net and some bags and bag up the trash we can get, and call the city, and they'll typically come and get it. So there's a lot we can all do individually. You can also, on a policy level, advocate for bottle deposits. If everybody had to pay 5 cents and could get it 5 cents back when they're done with their plastic bottle, that might solve quite a bit of this problem. Advocate for plastic bag bans or fees for plastic bags. And DOT has a good program called Swat a Litter Bug. I've used it before. If you're driving and you see somebody throw trash out of their windows of their car, or if they have an uncovered load of trash, you can actually go on your mobile phone and submit a report to DOT, get their license plate number and the location it happened, and they'll send a letter to people alerting them that they did something illegal, which was to throw trash out of their vehicle. Also a bit of an issue with illegal dumping. People who don't want to pay landfill tipping fees to get rid of their debris will dump debris, dump trash along the creek. And here's a couple of examples. What you can do about this issue, if you're having renovation done on your house, or you have some junk picked up, you call somebody, you're going to pay them to take your junk to the landfill. Ask them to give you copies of the landfill receipt to make sure that they actually did what you paid them to do, to take that to the landfill. If you have electronics, you can call the city and they'll pick them up as part of your regular trash pickup. If you see any illegal dumping, you can call the police department in Wilmington. That's the place to report illegal dumping. Another pollution issue is runoff of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers from people's lawns into the creek. And those can be problems. The fertilizer can be a problem because it can cause algae blooms, like you see here in this stormwater ditch that runs into Burnt Mill Creek. All that green in there is an algae bloom. And what that does is it depletes the stream of oxygen and can kill the organisms that live in the stream. The best thing we can all do about this is not to use these chemicals on our lawns. We've completely cut out using any of these types of things on our yard. And we have a beautiful garden. We have a lot of native plants don't require that special care. We've also reduced our lawn area, and instead of fertilizing the lawn we have left with commercial fertilizer, we use a mulching mower, and that seems to be everything the grass needs to be nice and green and healthy. If you can't do those things, you can minimize your use. You always want to follow the required application rates. These kinds of chemicals, more is not better. It's never better. And don't ever apply it before rain is forecast. And finally, you don't ever want to dump any lawn chemicals down storm drains because they will end up in the creek. That's where they go. Grease and detergents are also a common urban watershed pollutant. If you wash your car in your driveway and that wash water, including all the dirt and grease that it got off your car, runs down into the gutter, it's going to end up in the creek. There is actually, we had I think it was about a year or two ago, a mobile car wash had set up in a couple of blocks from us off of Market Street, and people were paying them to wash their cars. They were on a public street. They set up right next to a storm drain, and they were washing all that detergent and grease directly into the storm drain that goes to the creek. So that's not legal. It's not allowed. And so you can call the City of Wilmington if you see anything like that, and they will come out and they'll give a warning first time, and the second time they'll fine people. And it's a pretty substantial fine. So if you're washing your vehicle, do it on grass and away from storm drains, and never again, just like pesticides and herbicides, never dump any used motor oil or antifreeze down storm drains. PAHs are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the creek was listed in 2008 as being impaired for aquatic life, partially because of the impacts of these chemicals. They continue to be found in subsequent water monitoring reports, including the 2018 report by UNCW. Sources of PAHs are pretty varied. Tire particles, little bits of tire come off on the street, leaking motor oil, vehicle exhaust that again sticks to the pavement, and parking lot sealants. And you see these really, really black parking lots. That's because a sealer has been put on that parking lot. Older parking lots is pretty common. If you look at this commercial area here, that's in the Burnt Mill Creek watershed, this is South College Road and New Center. I put these little pins on here. Looking back at Google Earth, you can see when these different parking lots have sealers applied to them. And the problem with these is they're persistent in the environment, they'll attach to sediment particles, and they're known to be toxic to aquatic animals. A couple of things that can be done about these. Ideally, we'd use them a lot less or not at all. There are alternatives. There was a demonstration project done by NC State and City of Wilmington at that Port City Java parking lot that's directly next to the creek. Burnt Mill Creek is right on the other side of this fence here. And there's a storm drain that dumps directly into the creek from this parking lot. So NC State and the City of Wilmington did this project to put in this little bioretention cell, which so it captures the runoff from the parking lot, and the plants that are in that bioretention cell kind of help degrade those chemicals and keep them in place there instead of having them go into the creek. The town of Matthews in North Carolina has actually banned these products, and they're the first one, and as far as I know, the only municipality so far in North Carolina to do that. So things we can do is we don't use sealers on your own driveway, advocate for bans, and advocate also for codes that promote the use of concrete and permeable pavements. Permeable pavements, pervious pavements are up and coming technology that are being used to help reduce the amount of runoff that goes into creeks and streams by allowing it to percolate through the pavement into the underlying soils. So we're seeing a lot of advances in those and hope to see those used more. They tend to be more expensive than conventional pavements, but there's things that the state and the city can do and are doing to incentivize their use. So we'd like to see a lot more pervious pavements. Leaking underground fuel tanks. I showed you that picture earlier of Carter's Pharmacy and that Gulf sign and another gas station across the way. This is Prince's Place, and here's the creek. This is, again, a pretty common problem in older communities where you have old underground gas tanks that leaked over time, and many of them are still leaking. The gas station's not in business anymore. There's no money to remediate those tanks. Most of them, if they're known, are being monitored by DEQ. But this here on the left is the picture of the former fuel oil tank plume that was under Carter's Pharmacy. And that plume actually outfalls at the creek right there. And occasionally when we're at that part of the creek, we'll see and smell fuel on the surface of that creek, and we'll call DEQ and they'll come out and take a look at it. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of mechanisms or money to get these things remediated. And so one of the things we can do is ask our state legislators to strengthen the requirement for the remediation of these commercial leaking underground storage tanks. Sediment. You wouldn't think that dirt would be a problem, but it is a problem. You get a lot of suspended sediments in creeks that can smother the organisms and the plant community that lives in that creek. It tends to be even a worse problem in the Piedmont, where there's clay soils that the particles will stay suspended for a much longer period of time. But it is an issue here as well in terms of water quality, even though we have mostly sandy soils. And here's some examples. One on the right here is from Leland, and here's you may have heard about this on the news. I think there was a really intense rain event that washed a lot of sediment off a big suburban construction site into Airlie Gardens. And here's a picture of that from the Port City Daily. If you go by a construction site and you see sediment leaving that site, or you see that there's no silt fence up, then what you might want to consider doing is calling New Hanover County. They are in charge of monitoring compliance in our community. or the DEQ. There's a local DEQ office that you can call as well and say, I'm really concerned there's some uncontrolled release of sediment into a waterway or the potential for it at this location, and they'll send somebody out to take a look at it. The other thing, something I've been working with the city on, talking to the city about, is how the creek bank is maintained. City Stormwater maintains the banks of the creek, and the city Parks and Recs maintains the adjacent land that's parkland. And there's been some occasions recently where that mowing and maintenance has been really, really aggressive. As you can see here, the banks of the creek actually have been scalped by the mowing, and we've got erosion. And we've also not only have this issue with erosion, that buffer, that vegetated buffer that's so critical both for water quality and to support wildlife is completely gone. So right now, the city's been really responsive. City Stormwater, Fred Royal, is working on a buffer management plan so that they can develop a naturalized riparian buffer along the creek, focusing on native plants. And I think Lloyd Singleton at the Arboretum is able to assist with some recommendations for plant types that'll be a good choice. So we're really excited about the city's interest in changing their maintenance practice in this regard. Finally, under the threats, invasive species. Just this year, we've seen a huge water hyacinth bloom in the creek north of Princess Place Drive. That sewer pipe I showed you earlier where we were picking up trash against it, the creek was last time we were down there was completely full of water hyacinth. You could not see the water surface. And there's also things like Chinese wisteria, popcorn trees, kudzu, privet that we see in the natural areas in the creek. And these plants, they displace the native plants, and they usually provide little to no wildlife benefit. So some of the things that you can do are plant native plants in your yard is terrific. At a minimum, don't plant any of these plants that are known to be invasive. And another thing that happens is people release aquarium fish or pond plants into streams and creeks. They get tired of keeping their aquariums, so they go down to the nearest little stream and they dump the fish in there and all the plants with it. And those things become, the plants in particular become a really, really big problem, like this water hyacinth. So those are that's the bad news, is there's quite a bit of challenges in terms of pollution, but there's been a number of people are working to make the creek a cleaner, better, more vibrant place for people and for wildlife. Cape Fear River Watch, City of Wilmington, CFPUA are all working hard to make the creek a better place. Cape Fear River Watch just does a terrific job. In 2016 to 2020, Cape Fear River Watch, working with Keep America Beautiful, all these terrific volunteers, we've removed over 4,700 pounds of trash. That's a very conservative estimate, involving 450 volunteers, 13 individual events just along Burnt Mill Creek and its tributary, McCumber's Ditch. And the River Watch also has the Creek Watcher programs, where people like me and many other people have adopted a section of the creek, and they visit it at least once a month and make a report to Cape Fear River Watch, documenting any pollution they see, trash they picked up, water quality, and wildlife that they see. Eyes and ears are really important. Here's some pictures of some past cleanups. You can see the people get their kayaks out on the creek and fill them up with trash. There's been illegal, here's Larry here, standing in front of a bunch of tires that had been dumped. I think that might have been along Macumber's ditch. So this is a really terrific group of people that care a lot about the creek. City of Wilmington has done a series of small projects in the watershed. 5 of them recently they're really dependent on federal grant funds, federal or state grant funds to do these kinds of projects. I would love to see a permanent grant fund established in the city budget to be available as a local match when these funding opportunities come available. Feds in the state always want to see a local match, and that can be monetary or in kind with city labor or citizen labor. But a lot of those projects were in the watershed, but away from the creek, directly away from the creek. Things like rain gardens, rain barrels, some other demonstration projects, cisterns, things like that. And a couple of projects located along the creek itself. 2 of these, Mary Bridgers Park near the Carolina Place neighborhood. This is between Chestnut Street and Princess Place Drive. This is a stormwater wetland, an engineered stormwater wetland. And this little wetland area is a terrific place to see migrating birds. They seem to really like this spot. Got a little bridge over, it's very pretty. And what happens when you have stormwater runoff from Carolina Place neighborhood just to the left of this picture here, it comes in a pipe into this wetland where it can settle in and biological processes can happen and either degrade or remove a number of those pollutants. And so that that stormwater isn't running directly into the creek, which is right over here. Similar kind of mechanism at Wallace Park, where there's a stormwater wetland that was constructed. A little bit different design, but it also has a similar function. We could use a lot more of these kinds of projects, but again, they take money and time, and there's a lot of competition for grants for these types of things. CFPUA has invested millions of dollars in the last couple of years on upgrades as a result of these sewage spills, particularly the really bad one in 2019. The old pump station where the failure was off One Tree Hill Road has been completely replaced at a cost of $11.5 million. And that work was completed this October. So brand new. So you see a picture of that new pump station under construction. All of you who walk along the creek have seen these big plastic pipes along the creek. Those are temporary bypass pipes that are being used to convey sewage while the city works to repair about 7,600 feet of 36-inch diameter gravity sewer main that is actually underground for the most part, that runs along the creek greenway. That sewer main is more than 40 years old, and it has leaky joints, and it's had overflows during heavy rain. So they actually put a camera into these pipes, they clean them, and they install a structural liner inside those existing old pipes so they don't have to dig them up. And they're investing $4 million in that project, which began last year and is expected to be completed next year. Finally, Wilmington and New Hanover County have plans to improve the access to the Greenway as part of the 2013 Greenway Plan. See the creek here along the right, this is Forest Hills Elementary, Wallace Park, Flytrap Downs, Rugby Field, Archie Blue Park. Basically, they're proposing to put in a series of crossings under bridges to make this more accessible from end to end. Right now, that railroad trestle, you cannot get from the creek right here to Archie Blue Park because of that. You can't get under the railroad trestle and then across the creek to Archie Blue. So that is a project that is right now, it's just notional. It is not funded. It is not in the current state transportation improvement program, which goes through 2029. So, but it is maybe something that'll happen someday if funds become available. It's a pretty expensive project, estimated $3.5 million, 2013 costs. So final thoughts, this is my last slide. I would hope that some of the things you might take away from this is how important it is to embrace scruffiness. It's not good to over-maintain natural areas and creeks like this, because wildlife needs that habitat. They need the cover, and things like stream buffers, although they may look messier than a mowed and maintained greenway, they're really good for water quality. All those natural systems are terrific for water quality. And while, the fact that this pollution is diffuse and that everybody contributes to it, while that makes it hard to manage, it also means that we can all make a difference. Collectively, if enough of us get involved in picking up trash, advocating for more funding, advocating for changes in regulations that would reduce this pollution load, we really can make a difference. And the creek is really a community treasure, and we're very lucky to have it in this community. And I hope working together, we can keep it the special place it is in the long term. So that's my end of my presentation.
I don't even want to speak because it was so wonderful. I kind of wanted to keep going. But let's open it up for Q&A. First of all, thank you, Amy. I know from my part, I learned a ton from that. It was really a wonderful presentation. I appreciate all the time that you put into that. So if you have a question for Amy, please unmute yourself, because again, I muted everyone.
Yes, can I ask a question? Hello?
Sure, we can hear you.
Yeah. So thank you for that wonderful, wonderful talk. That was great. And beautiful pictures. I have one question and one comment. I wish you would tell us, like, for Burnt Mill Creek, like where the mill was and what kind of a mill it was and when it burned down.
I was going to mention that. I'm glad you brought that up. The answer is we don't know for sure. We don't. The historians, Chris Fonville, who knows a lot about history here, he got asked that question, I think, in the Star News 10 years or so ago. And they think the burnt mill was actually on what is now called McCumber's Ditch. That was originally called Burnt Creek. It is actually west of Oakdale Cemetery. The old name of Burnt Mill Creek was Green's Mill Pond. So we don't know where the mill was. I'd love to know. If anybody ever finds out, please let me know.
Okay, and one comment. So that map you put up at the very end was great with the Greenway connection. I sure would love to see a connection that goes from Forest Hills Elementary to that Anne McCrary Park. So the whole thing. So you can walk like from that Anne McCrary Park all the way up to Princess Place Drive. That would be just wonderful.
It would be. I don't know what the impediments are. You can't walk through there because it appears to be the back of people's yards. I don't know. It's
private property.
Yeah, I don't know if the city has an easement over it, but yeah, that would be fantastic.
Amy, there's a question in the chat. I'll just read before the chat keeps on going and we lose it. What are some access points to the park for those who don't live nearby?
Okay. It's mostly street parking. You can park on Chestnut Road near Annie Snipes, and that gives you direct access to the Greenway. Shirley Road in the Princess Place neighborhood, there's a little bit of parking. There's like a gate with a chain. You can just walk right over the chain and get to the park there. You can park on the street on Metz Avenue and access the creek there as well. I'm not aware of any dedicated parking lots along the Greenway. It's more on street parking.
1 or 2 cars at a time can park at the end of Pender. Pender quits at the edge of the park.
Great. Thanks.
I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The resource that you posted about calling I guess a non-emergency police number if you see illegal dumping such as TVs on the side of the road, is that if you catch someone in the act, or is it if you pass that on the side of the road and you're trying to figure out a way to address it as a citizen?
Either one.
Wonderful.
We found some dumping. It was really bad after one of the hurricanes behind Carter's Pharmacy in the woods, and we called started with the city, and they said you need to call the police, and the police said you need to call the city, and kind of went back and forth a bit, but ultimately it was the police who were supposed to respond. And I think ultimately they ended up coordinating with the city and got that stuff removed. But you start with the police.
Great,
Yeah,
thank
hi,
you.
this is Barbara. I can talk to that too, because we had that same situation up there by the Forest Hills Apartments. And I called the police. I did have to keep, you know, I didn't nag them exactly, but I did have to keep calling them back, and they came and took it out and talked to construction places around there that were building houses and explained to them that it was illegal.
Amy,
Yes.
can you hear me? This is Pris, and my husband birds Burnt Mill Creek a lot, and I've been with him several times. He's fascinated by the fact that there's so many birds there and there's so much pollution. But I don't even like to go over there to walk because the pollution is just right there in your face. I think it's our best example of urban pollution. So how do you explain that the birds, there's so many birds there, or is it that there are many other places in the county that we can't get to so easily where there are lots of birds too?
I think that it's a couple things going on. I think despite the pollution, it is in our area, it's one of the last remaining places where you have nearly, over a mile of contiguous habitat that has a pretty good variety of habitat. You've got mature trees, you've got open grassy areas, you have shrubby areas, you have water, and I think there's a lot of insects that are, prime source of food for birds. And so I think those things are attractive to birds, especially migrating birds that may see this sea of urban concrete and they see that strip of green and come to that strip of green, and they hang out there for a while until they continue their journey. The plastic trash, while it's an aesthetic and pollution issue from our perspective, I mean, I don't think the birds necessarily perceive it that way. As long as they can have things to eat and a place to hide, they sort of ignore it. We of course find it repulsive.
This is Dana. I do have two things to point out. Our cleanup coordinator, Audrey, and I talked with Amy about this yesterday, I think. She's required, our contract with the city has a lot of requirements on where to clean up, and a lot of them are around this area. And she said, you know, actually the last couple of weeks, it's been too clean to set a cleanup at. And that's kind of a testament to Amy's work and the community's work as a whole. People are starting to pick things up, I think. And so that's one good little piece of snippet of good news. And then second, we have 2 grants out. So fingers crossed, applications out for some litter getters in that area. So just hold your good energy that we'll get one or both of those.
And those devices, Dana, that would be sort of attached to the end of a storm drain pipe, or that would be like a baffle around the outlet, and they'd sort of collect trash so people could get it out more easily.
Exactly.
People are, this is not a problem that's unique to Wilmington. Everywhere in the country, people are really struggling with plastic urban pollution in waterways, and we don't have any good solutions. We don't. It's day after day after day, it's a fight. I mean, what we can all do is evangelize about it, talk to our neighbors about making sure people understand that if you don't pick it up, it's not getting picked up. Maybe you're lucky to have a street sweeper come in your neighborhood. We do occasionally, but there is no way they can keep up with that stuff. The DOT has terrible budget shortfalls, and they haven't been able to get their crews out to pick up trash along the roadways. I mean, you see it everywhere, and it's a culture. And so we've got to be part of the culture that says this is not acceptable, and we got to participate in fixing it.
Amy, there's another question in the chat. I just lost it. Oh, can you talk about areas to launch canoes or kayaks?
There aren't really any formal areas to do that except Archie Blue. Archie Blue does have a place to put in kayaks. And if you launch at Archie Blue, you can go north to Smith Creek. You can't go south because that big sewage pipe across the creek prevents you from going south. There's kind of a couple of just sort of cuts in the creek bank where the city will put in little boats just south of that sewer line, and you could put kayaks in there as well. I'm not aware of any others.
Amy,
Yes.
this is Cynthia Sosnowski. My husband and I are new residents in Leland, and we live in a gated planned community, and they have what they refer to as lakes in this community. They're not really lakes, but they're little bodies of water. And we watched them this week completely cutting and removing all of the green, the grasses and everything around several of these lakes, and then replacing it with dirt for what I guess they think is aesthetic reasons, because they're getting ready for this big parade of homes this weekend. I don't really want to end up on the wrong side immediately, having been new residents. Developer managed HOA, but I don't really know how to approach this. I know what they're doing is antithetical to good water management.
It's kind of a complicated question. If those are formal stormwater retention ponds, they may not be allowed by regulation to allow them to naturalize. You'll see it like the parking lot at Costco or the parking lot at Walmart. You'll see these ponds that are adjacent to the park. They look like ponds, but they're engineered systems that are supposed to capture runoff from the parking lot. And there's pretty strict rules about how much vegetation is allowed to grow around those. So I don't know if that's the case you're dealing with, or whether it's really more of a neighborhood amenity that it doesn't have that regulatory function. If it's the latter, then I think a polite phone call to the HOA asking, what are the maintenance policies around these ponds? Has there been any consideration about letting them become more naturalized? Because that would help with stormwater pollution and also be appealing to people. So HOAs are tough, but I've known some people who are able over time to encourage some more ecologically friendly maintenance.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think these ponds are probably a combination of the both of those things, but I think I will attempt to approach it in a mild way like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Ed Ablard. I want to suggest that maybe you can put in at the Bellevue Cemetery verge there, just north of the bridge where Carter's Pharmacy was. Have you ever explored that? That looked like a beach at one time. It's now pretty heavily vegetated, but we saw a big gator there. That's another deterrent to putting a boat in there. I want to ask another question though. Don't you think we ought to do something about preventing another major flooding incident like you pictured? The Tidewater gate that you pictured was badly out of repair for a long time, and just was inadequate to the job. The Smith Creek overflowed back up into our area, and it flooded as far north as 14th Street on the ditch, McCumber's ditch, and as far north as Metz Avenue during that Hurricane Florence.
Well,
It was preceded by other years of flooding along Wallace Park, which made Wallace Park a toxic waste ground for a while. And I think we need to protect our neighborhood with some sort of and I've used the term dike, to prevent flooding up in our area. And would a civil engineer like you support something like that where we dike and pump out?
I'm not sure I can answer a complicated question like that. I mean, the Greenway is a floodplain. It is a floodway. That's topography. What communities have done in the past that I would not support in urban communities is they remove the creek. They put in a huge culvert and there is no creek anymore. But if you have an open water system like that creek is, when you have heavy rainfall events, the water is going to move out of the banks and it's going to fill up that floodplain. And so I don't know how the tide gate functions. I don't know how it's managed. I've asked the city about that, and I'm not sure there's a lot of clarity about how that's managed. In my opinion, if there's regularly flooding properties along that greenway, we ought to be looking at options to get those people opportunities to move out of the floodplain. The other things we can do is to reduce how quickly water gets into the creek by widening the creek, providing some side basins and side channels, trying to slow the flow down upstream of the creek through those kinds of naturalized measures. That would take a concerted effort and a lot of investment to do that. And we'd have to stop allowing developers to develop their lots from lot line to lot line and require more on-site storage of floodwaters. That's just not happening. We have all kinds of old legacy developments that have no stormwater retention at all, like the old Kmart parking lot on College Avenue. Huge impervious surface, not a single way to slow that water down or contain it when there's a big storm event. So I'd rather focus on improving those things than dikes, but that's my opinion.
And I can speak a little bit to that question, Ed. Cape Fear River Partnership coordinator, Dawn York, has been working on a project with her engineering firm and the city for a good couple years now. There were a couple grant requests that went out and were not successful in tidal gate research. At this point, it's just like Amy said, we need to know what it would do. And so the funds to get to that point have not yet been, we haven't been successful in getting them, but there are some folks working on that issue.
Hi, could I just say something about Randall Pond? Randall Pond is a big retention area. that a lot of creeks that flow into Burnt Mill Creek as part of the Burnt Mill Creek watershed. And I live in a community called Birch Creek, and we have a easement with a Downey Branch, which is one of the upper watershed of the Randall Pond and the Burnt Mill Creek watershed. One of the things that I want to just note about I've been observing this for a long time. We have a beaver dam that has recently been built on Downey Branch. I presume the beavers came up from Randall Pond. So I don't know if anybody else knows about any beaver activity, or if anybody would like to see this, I would love to show them the beaver dam that has been built and is retaining water into a part of the watershed, not a managed part by humans, but managed by beavers. Just a point. Okay.
Yeah, that was the flood control that Ed's talking about was a function that beavers used to serve and still serve in large parts of the country.
Hi, this is
Slow that
Barbara.
water down and retain it for a while.
That kind of brings up my question. I was wondering if you came across in your investigations about the history of the creek about what may have been a keystone species for that creek. If you found anything about when it was more naturalized, if there were any species that may have kept it naturally healthier than it seems to be now.
I haven't. I would love to know that information.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a biological community study of the creek. I'd love to know more about what is living there and what the variety of fish is and crustaceans and how far is it brackish, and I'd love to know more about that. I wish I was a biologist.
Well, speaking about those crabs that you showed, I do know that in our section of the creek, certainly along Mary Bridgers Park, there used to be a large crab spot there that over the years has completely disappeared. And I did read that, those mosquito fish that they use as a natural solution to mosquitoes, it's sort of like a plus and a minus because apparently they eat crab eggs. So I'm wondering if that is why our crab population there in Mary Bridgers Park has gone away, but it has completely gone away, sadly. And sorry, I did have one more comment just for the person who was talking about the plastic pollution. And I will say over the last probably since you were talking about 2016 when, there's been a lot more cleanups in the park. I've definitely seen a huge improvement. I will say that this summer, with the introduction of that huge alligator who was hanging out quite regularly in our neighborhoods, there was a lot more plastic coming back because I think people who were doing this, I think myself included, it didn't seem quite as attractive to get into the stream and pick up plastic when whatever they named him, I think they named him Sam or something, and then his name changed later. But anyway, just as an FYI, it's a little bit worse now than it has been.
I think if are there any further questions, comments? I want to honor Amy's time, and I do want to promote one more time. I'm sorry, was somebody, I can't see if somebody's trying to say something. I don't want to
Gallery.
Sure.
I have just a comment I'd love to insinuate, if I may. I got another reminder this month of the value of asking questions and thinking outside the box and questioning how we always do things. I live a block from the creek, or a block from the edge of the Wallace Park, and the city replaced some of the damaged portions of the sidewalk that runs along the front of my house. And I was talking to the crews and asked whether there was ever an opportunity to have pervious paving instead of regular concrete. And the answer I got was that this had been investigated a few years ago. They had in fact found a company that would do pervious paving, but the obstacle was that company that sold the material insisted on being the one to do the installation. And the city of Wilmington wanted to do the installation. They just wanted to buy the product. And so he told me that the project kind of died in the water. But that was the obstacle, and maybe things have changed, and maybe that's something we could start introducing in the neighborhood as an additional help to counter stormwater runoff.
Valerie, that's a great point, and I would encourage folks to reach out to the Coastal Federation on that. I think they do have a program for HOAs and other community members to encourage that exact type of thing and to help people have those conversations and figure out where to go.
And I would also suggest calling city stormwater or your city council member and saying that you think it's important that the city emphasize trying to find ways to use some of these new approaches because that it ultimately addresses things like Ed's concerned about, is flooding and as well as pollution.
Yeah, stop it at the source.
Yeah.
So
can I ask one more quick question? Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
So it sounds like part of this is at least has some tidal, there's some tidal impact to it. Is sea level rise beginning to show any impact on the creek?
I don't know the answer to that. You know, we're in the Cape Fear Arch, which is actually moving up a little bit, unlike the rest of the coastline. I know that CFPUA is concerned about the elevation of some of their pump stations and their facilities, so they may be seeing noticing some increase in normal water levels. Larry, do you know anything about?
Let me unmute. Yeah. The big effect in our area has been the deepening of the river channel. That has allowed tidal amplitudes to get much higher up around Wilmington compared to how it used to be even 30-40 years ago. If you drive along Martin Luther King Parkway and see all those dead cypress trees along Smith Creek, that is the influence of saltwater intrusion. Cypress trees are intolerant of salt. So when you see them standing dead, it means that there used to be fresh water there and now it's too salty for them to leave out. In 2016, when we had unusual El Nino rains and you had a lot more fresh water in the system, some of those trees leafed out again. They're not really dead yet. If you look in the lower reaches of Burnt Mill Creek and look for standing dead cypress trees, that will be your indicator of whether you got saltwater intrusion as a problem there.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. All right, everybody. Let's give Amy a round of applause. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Again, Archie Blue Park, the event is started already. Please feel free to head over. Today it ends at 2 p.m. Kemp will be there with the boat. We'll have lunch provided by Catch. We will talk about Gen X exposure study, environmental justice, and creek watchers. So that's going on, and you can sort of see some of the things that Amy was talking about today in some of her photos of that area. Again, this presentation has been recorded. If you want to share it with folks, it will be available on our YouTube channel, and it's also sitting on Facebook right now on the live stream, so you can share it from there as well. Please join our email list to keep up with all the things that we do. Go to capefearriverwatch.org to do that. And with that, everybody, I hope you have a great, wonderful, sunny Saturday afternoon. Thank you again, Amy.
Thank you.
Amy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Riverwatch.